Her husband beat her every day, until Paloma quietly disappeared one morning. The plan that began that day would condemn a monster. So where did Paloma go? The move she would make 43 days later would change not only her life, but also Rodrigo's destiny. Follow this story to the end, and don't forget to share your thoughts with us in the comments. The blow echoed throughout the house like a clap of thunder. Paloma Herrera fell to the kitchen floor with a split lip and her left eye instantly swelling up. The tortillas she had been preparing for dinner were scattered across the Talavera tile floor, while the griddle continued to heat up on the stove. "I told you I wanted meat, not this crap," Rodrigo Mendoza shouted, his fists still clenched and a beer in his other hand. "What good are you if you can't even make a decent dinner?" It was Tuesday night in the Prospect Hill neighborhood of San Antonio, Texas. The neighbors were already used to the shouting coming from house number 412 on Morelos Street. Doña Carmen, the lady next door, turned up the volume on her television every time the fighting started. Don Esteban, on the other side, went into his house and slammed the windows shut. Paloma wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. At 32, she no longer remembered what it was like to smile without her face hurting. She had been married to Rodrigo for 8 years, and the first 2 had been the only ones in which he had not laid a hand on her. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered, slowly getting up from the floor. "I'll make you some eggs with chorizo, just the way you like them." Rodrigo looked at her with contempt. He was a 35-year-old man, dark-skinned and robust, who worked as a supervisor in a textile factory. To everyone else, he was the perfect husband, hard-working, responsible, never missing family gatherings, and always bringing beer to Sunday barbecues. "You better make it good," he muttered as he headed for the living room. "And don't take too long. I have to get up early tomorrow." Paloma began to pick up the tortillas from the floor with trembling hands. Her neighbors thought she was clumsy, always bumping into doors or tripping on the stairs. Rodrigo was very convincing when explaining his wife's bruises. "She fell in the bathroom," he would say with a worried look on his face. "You know how absent-minded my dove is." And everyone believed him. How could they not believe Rodrigo Mendoza, the man who helped carry the elderly lady's groceries and always lent his tools to anyone who needed them? While frying the sausage, Paloma heard her husband talking on the phone with his friend Javier. "Hey buddy, how's the family?" Rodrigo said in a completely different voice, warm and friendly. "Yeah, we're doing okay. Paloma's making dinner. You know how dedicated she is." Paloma closed her eyes. It was like living with 2 different people. The Rodrigo everyone knew was charming, hard-working, the life of the party. The Rodrigo who lived in that house was a monster who woke her up by hitting her if dinner wasn't ready on time, who pulled her hair if she didn't iron his shirts properly, who humiliated her in front of her own family and then apologized in private, only to attack her again hours later. The 2-story house on Morelos Street looked normal from the outside. It had a red brick facade, windows with white bars, and a small front garden where Paloma grew red geraniums. But inside, every corner echoed with her muffled screams. The master bedroom had seen him throw her against the wall when she took too long to get undressed. The staircase knew the sound of her body rolling from the 5th step to the 1st when he decided she had taken too long to come down and serve him water. The bathroom mirror had a crack in it from the night he slammed her head against the glass because he didn't like how she had combed her hair. Paloma served the eggs with chorizo on Rodrigo's favorite plate, the blue one with yellow flowers that her mother-in-law had given her. She walked slowly to the living room where he was watching a soccer game. "Here you go, my love," she said, placing the plate on the coffee table. Rodrigo took a bite and frowned. "You're salty, really. Let me try it." "No!" he shouted, throwing the plate on the floor. "It's salty. Period. You can't do anything right, woman." The plate shattered on the tile floor. Paloma immediately bent down to pick up the pieces, but he stopped her by grabbing her hair. "Leave it there," he whispered in her ear. "You'll pick it up tomorrow. Now go make another dinner, and you better make it perfect." He pushed her away. Paloma went back to the kitchen with silent tears running down her cheeks. Outside, life went on as usual in the Prospect Hill neighborhood. Children played soccer in the street. Women chatted on the sidewalks, and men came home from work looking forward to a peaceful dinner. But at house number 412, hell had a schedule. It began when Rodrigo came home from work and ended when he decided he had punished his wife enough for existing. That night, like every night for the past 6 years, Paloma Herrera would stay up late, cleaning the blood from her lip and promising herself that tomorrow would be different. But tomorrow was never different. What Paloma didn't know was that in exactly 43 days, she would make a decision that would change everything forever. 3 weeks after the broken plate incident, Paloma Herrera was walking through the San Juan de Dios market in downtown San Antonio, wearing dark glasses that hid a black eye that had been fading for 5 days. Her younger sister, Hope, accompanied her as she bought vegetables for the week. Music. "Paloma, why don't you tell me what happened to your eye?" Hope asked, carrying a bag of tomatoes. "And don't tell me you fell again, because I don't believe you anymore." Paloma pretended to examine some poblano peppers to avoid her sister's gaze. "I already told you, Espe. I got up too quickly and bumped into the closet door. Rodrigo scolded me for being distracted." "Did he scold you? Or hit you?" Hope's question cut through the air like a knife. Paloma froze. No one had ever asked her so directly. It was always indirect assumptions, comments she could easily dodge. But this time, her 26-year-old younger sister was confronting her head-on. "Don't be silly, Hope," Paloma muttered, paying the lord of the Childs. "Rodrigo is a good man, hard-working, responsible." "Paloma, I've known you since I was born," Hope interrupted, taking her by the arm. "You've changed. You don't smile like you used to. You're afraid to even speak loudly. And you always have some new bruise. Do you think I'm stupid?" At that moment, Paloma's cell phone rang. It was Rodrigo. "Well, where are you?" Her husband's voice sounded annoyed. "I got home and there's no food ready." Paloma looked at her watch. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. "I'm at the market, my love. I'll be home in half an hour, and I'll make you something to eat." "Half an hour? You have 15 minutes to get here, or you'll see what happens to you." The call was cut off. Paloma turned pale. "Wait, I have to go." Rodrigo came home early and looked at Hope furiously. "He's going to hit you if you don't come running like a little dog. Listen to yourself, Paloma. Listen to how you talk." Paloma began to walk quickly toward the market exit. "You don't understand, Hope. You're not married. You don't know what it's like to have responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" Hope shouted after her. "Paloma, please, that's not a responsibility. It's a prison." But Paloma was already getting into a taxi for the ride to the Prospect Hill neighborhood. She remained silent, mentally preparing the apologies she would give Rodrigo. She knew exactly what words to use to calm him down, how to tilt her head to show her mission, how to prepare his favorite meal in record time. She had perfected the art of being invisible. When she arrived at the house, Rodrigo was sitting in the living room watching television with a sour look on his face. Paloma sneaked in through the back door and quickly began taking the vegetables out of the bags. "Paloma!" he shouted from the living room. "Come here." She left everything in the kitchen and walked toward the living room with her head down. "Yes, my love. Sit down." He pointed to the armchair. "We need to talk." Paloma sat on the edge of the chair with her hands on her knees. Rodrigo looked at her with that expression she knew so well, the one that preceded the humiliation. "Your sister Hope was here an hour ago," he said, leaning back on the sofa. "She came to ask me about your injuries." Paloma's mouth went dry. "What? What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that you're very clumsy and always hurting yourself, but she didn't seem to believe me very much." Rodrigo smiled sinisterly. "What do you think, Paloma? Did you tell her something you shouldn't have?" "No, Rodrigo. I swear. I would never." "Liar." He stood up abruptly. "Of course you said something to her. That's why she came to interrogate me, like I was a criminal." Paloma also stood up, backing away toward the wall. "I really didn't say anything to her, my love. Hope has always been very inquisitive, ever since she was little." "Ah, yes. Nosy." Rodrigo approached her. "Well, let's see if she's still so nosy after this." The first blow knocked her to the ground. The second split her lip open again. But this time, as he kicked her in the ribs, something inside Paloma broke in a different way. It wasn't her body. It wasn't her bones. It was the last spark of hope she had, that someone would one day help her. Because if her own sister had come to confront Rodrigo, and he had managed to convince her that everything was fine, then no one would ever believe her. She was completely alone. That night, as she tended to her wounds in the bathroom, Paloma looked in the mirror and no longer recognized the woman staring back at her. It wasn't just the bruises or the swelling. It was because there was nothing left in her eyes. No hope, no fear, no pain, just a deep and dangerous emptiness. Rodrigo didn't know it, but he had just created something he had never seen before. A Herrera dove who had nothing left to lose. It was Friday, October 13th, when the night that would change everything forever arrived. Paloma had spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom, preparing Rodrigo's favorite dinner, carne en su jugo con frijoles charros, and organizing his shirts by color, just the way he liked them. Rodrigo arrived at 8 p.m., drunker than usual. He had been at a cantina in downtown San Antonio with his co-workers celebrating his boss's birthday. Paloma heard him arrive from the kitchen, the garage door opening violently, the car door slamming, his unsteady footsteps in the entrance. "Paloma!" he shouted from the door. "Come help me with my shoes." She ran immediately. Rodrigo was leaning against the wall in the hall, his eyes glassy and his breath reeking of tequila and beer. His white shirt had sauce stains and a lipstick stain on the collar that Paloma pretended not to see. "Take off my shoes," he ordered, sitting heavily on the living room couch. Paloma knelt in front of him and began to untie the laces of his black dress shoes. Rodrigo looked down at her with a crooked smile that did not bode well. "You know what, Paloma?" he said, playing with her hair. "I saw your sister Hope downtown today. She was with a guy, a very handsome guy, by the way." Paloma continued to untie his shoes without saying anything. "Aren't you going to ask me who she was with?" Rodrigo insisted. "If you want to talk to me, I'm listening," she replied in a neutral voice. "She was with Roberto Santillan. Does that name ring a bell?" Rodrigo smiled maliciously. "That lawyer who's always on the news defending women. You know, the ones who say their husbands beat them." Paloma stood still. She knew that name. Roberto Santillan was famous in San Antonio for winning domestic violence cases. He was on television talking about women's rights. "It makes me laugh," Rodrigo continued, taking a sip of the beer Paloma had poured him. "All those hysterical old women who go crying to lawyers because their husbands give them what they deserve, as if they didn't ask for it." Paloma finished taking off his shoes and got up to put them in the closet. "What do you think, Paloma?" he asked her. "Do you think it's okay for a woman to gossip with lawyers instead of taking care of her family?" It was a trap. Paloma knew it. Any answer she gave would be the wrong one. "I think everyone knows what they're doing," she murmured. "Oh yeah." Rodrigo stood up suddenly. "Everyone knows what they're doing, like your sister who goes around meddling in things that are none of her business." "Rodrigo, please, I don't know anything about that." "Of course you do," he shouted, staggering. "You're both plotting behind my back. You think I'm—" Paloma backed away toward the kitchen, but he followed her. "Rodrigo, I swear I haven't talked to anyone about anything. Please, let's have dinner. I made you meat in its own juice." "I don't want your dinner," he roared, throwing the clay pot against the wall. The pot shattered, and the meat spilled all over the kitchen floor. Paloma instinctively bent down to start cleaning up, but Rodrigo pulled her up by her hair. "Do you think I'm stupid, Paloma?" he shouted in her face. "Do you think I don't realize you're talking about me with your family?" "No, Rodrigo, I swear to God. Don't swear in vain." He slapped her, throwing her against the refrigerator. "Tell me the truth. Did you tell Hope that I hit you?" Paloma remained silent, her cheek burning. In that silence, Rodrigo found his answer. "So you did tell her," he muttered, with a calmness that was 1,000 times more terrifying than his screams. "My own wife, the woman who eats my money, who lives in my house, who uses my last name, is going around making me look like a batterer." "Rodrigo, I never shut up!" he yelled, punching her in the stomach and doubling her over. "If you like playing the victim so much, I'll give you reasons to be a real victim." What happened next was different from all the previous times. Rodrigo didn't just hit her, he tortured her. He dragged her around the house, threw her against the walls, pulled her hair until he ripped out whole strands, broke 2 of her ribs, dislocated her left shoulder, and cut her forehead, which wouldn't stop bleeding. But the worst part wasn't the beating. The worst part was when he got tired of hitting her and decided to humiliate her in the most horrible way he could think of. "Now you're going to call your sister," he said, throwing the phone at her as she lay on the living room floor. "You're going to call her and tell her that everything is perfect, that your husband treats you like a queen, and that she should never meddle in our affairs again." Paloma was shaking so badly that she could barely hold the phone. "Rodrigo, please, dial her number," he roared. "Dial her, or I swear I'll kill you tonight." With trembling hands, Paloma dialed her sister's number. Hope answered on the second ring. "Paloma, are you okay?" "It's 11 p.m., you idiot," Paloma whispered, trying to control her voice. "I'm calling to apologize." "An apology? Why?" Rodrigo was standing next to her, listening to every word. "For making you think bad things about Rodrigo. He's a good man, Hope. An excellent husband. I'm just very dramatic sometimes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Paloma, are you okay? Your voice sounds strange." "I'm fine," she lied, as blood dripped from her forehead onto the phone. "Rodrigo takes good care of me. I don't want you to think badly of him again." "It's okay, Paloma. It's okay, Hope," she insisted, looking at Rodrigo. Yes, it's okay, thank you. I love you very much." Paloma hung up and handed the phone back to Rodrigo. He smiled with satisfaction. "Very good," he said. "Now go clean up all this blood you've made. Tomorrow morning you have to go to work as if nothing had happened." Rodrigo went to sleep as if it were a normal night. Paloma stayed awake until 5 in the morning, cleaning her own blood off the floor, treating her wounds as best she could, and feeling more dead than alive. But as she cleaned, something inside her hardened forever. It was no longer fear she felt, no longer pain, but something much more dangerous. It was the absolute certainty that this had to end. And when Paloma Herrera made a decision, no one in the world could stop her. Saturday, October 14th, dawned gray in San Antonio. Rain-laden clouds spread over the metropolitan area like a heavy blanket that foreshadowed a storm. Paloma got up at 5:30 in the morning like every other day, but this time, every movement took a superhuman effort. Her broken ribs throbbed with every breath. Her dislocated shoulder was immobile, wrapped in a bandage she had improvised from an old sheet. She had covered the wound on her forehead with cinnamon-colored concealer she had bought at the Soriana on the corner, the same one she had been using to cover up all her bruises for years. Rodrigo snored in the double bed as if he had had the most pleasant night of his life. His hands, the same ones that had destroyed her 12 hours earlier, rested peacefully on his chest. Paloma watched him sleep, and for the first time in 8 years of marriage, she felt no fear. She felt disgust. She shuffled to the kitchen, careful not to make any noise on the cold tile floor. The broken clay pot was still scattered on the floor, along with dried remnants of meat in its juice, which had turned into a brown stain on the white tiles. Paloma began to clean everything meticulously, like a robot programmed to erase the evidence of her own destruction. At 6:15, she prepared coffee in a blue pewter pot she had inherited from her grandmother Concepcion. The aroma of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the kitchen, mixing with the smell of bleach she had used to clean the blood. Rodrigo appeared in the kitchen at 6:30, already dressed in his supervisor's uniform, navy blue jeans, a white long-sleeved shirt, and black safety shoes. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing her on the cheek, as if he were the most affectionate husband in the world. "Good morning," Paloma murmured, pouring him coffee in his favorite mug, La Blanca, with the Chivas de San Antonio logo. "Is lunch ready?" Rodrigo asked, checking his Samsung cell phone while eating the scrambled eggs and ham she had prepared. "Yes, it's in your backpack. Carnitas sandwiches, chopped fruit, and hibiscus tea. Perfect." Rodrigo finished his coffee in one gulp. "I'll be late today because I'm going for a few beers with the guys from the night shift. It's payday Friday. You know, it was Monday, not Friday." But Paloma no longer corrected Rodrigo's lies. She had learned that the truth always came at a higher price than silence. "It's okay, my love. I'll be waiting for you with dinner ready." Rodrigo picked up his blue cooler bag and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned back and hugged her around the waist. Paloma tensed when he squeezed her exactly where her ribs were broken. "I love you, Paloma," he whispered in her ear. "You're the best wife in the world." Forgive me if I sometimes get desperate, but it's because I love you so much that I go crazy when I think I might lose you." Paloma nodded, holding back her tears. "I love you too, Rodrigo. Truly, truly." He smiled contentedly and kissed her on the lips, which tasted of coffee and lies. "See you tonight, my love." Paloma waited until she heard the engine of the 2005 Tsuru driving away down Morelos Street. Then, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. But she didn't cry out of pain or fear. She cried out of rage. She went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. Her reflection showed her a 32-year-old woman who looked 50, with dull brown hair, sallow skin, and sunken eyes surrounded by purple circles that no makeup could completely hide. "Who are you?" she asked her reflection aloud. Her reflection did not answer. Who were you before him? Silence. What did you want to do when you grew up? Suddenly, like a bolt of lightning splitting the gray sky of San Antonio, Paloma remembered. She had wanted to be a teacher. She had studied for 2 years toward a degree in elementary education at the National Pedagogical University, San Antonio campus. She had dropped out when she met Rodrigo, because he had told her that married women didn't need to work, that he would support her like a queen. "Professor Paloma Herrera," she murmured, looking at her reflection. "That's what you were going to do." She stood in front of the mirror for 20 minutes, remembering the woman she had been before she became a punching bag with a name and surname. She remembered when she laughed loudly, when she spoke her mind without asking permission, when she dreamed of having her own school in a small town in Texas. That woman had died slowly, blow after blow, humiliation after humiliation. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something left of her. Paloma left the bathroom and went to the closet in the guest room, where she kept a Nike shoebox full of old photographs. Among them, she found what she was looking for, her UPN student ID, where she appeared smiling at 18, with long, shiny hair and eyes full of hope. "Hello, Paloma," she said to the photograph. "You're still in there?" She tucked the ID into her bra, close to her heart, and began to plan something she had never dared to even think about: a life without Rodrigo Mendoza. That afternoon, while preparing tortilla soup for dinner, Paloma did something she hadn't done in 8 years. She wrote a list, not of household chores or grocery shopping, but a list of everything she needed to disappear. She wrote it on a paper napkin, which she then burned on the stove, but the words remained etched in her mind, like red-hot iron. Money, documents, clothes, phone, plan, courage. Rodrigo arrived at 11 p.m., drunk and in a bad mood because his favorite team, Atlas, had lost 3-0 to America. That night he hit her for making the soup too salty, for putting too little salt in the soup, for breathing too loudly while he watched the news, and for existing. But while he was kicking her on the living room floor, Paloma was no longer there. In her mind, she was already free. And that was the most dangerous thing that could happen to a man like Rodrigo Mendoza, facing a woman who was no longer afraid to die, because a woman like that is capable of anything. Thursday, November 2nd, was the Day of the Dead in Los Angeles. But for Paloma Herrera, it was the day she had decided to resurrect herself. For 3 weeks, she had been planning every detail with the precision of a surgeon. While Rodrigo believed he had his wife completely under his control, she had been preparing her escape like a prisoner of war who had been digging a tunnel to freedom for years. She had started by saving coins. Every peso Rodrigo meant her for groceries, she set aside 50 cents. She hid them in an empty Nescafe jar that she had buried in a pot of red geraniums in the garden. In 3 weeks, she had saved up 430 pesos. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She had also been losing important documents. Her birth certificate had disappeared from the drawer where Rodrigo kept all the important papers under lock and key. Her voter registration card was now hidden in the hem of an old curtain. She had taken her high school diploma out of the family folder, little by little, page by page, when he wasn't looking. But most importantly, she had been studying Rodrigo's schedule like a private detective. Rodrigo left the house at 7 a.m. and returned at 5:30 p.m. when he didn't go out drinking. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he had a meeting with his boss until 6 p.m. On Fridays, He always came home drunk after 10 p.m. On Saturdays, he played soccer with his friends on the field in the Santa Margarita neighborhood from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Paloma had chosen Saturday, November 5th, to disappear. That morning, Rodrigo woke up in a great mood because his amateur soccer team, the Leones de Prospect Hill, was going to play in the semifinals of the Municipal League tournament. He showered whistling Vicente Fernandez's ranchera songs, ate red chilaquiles with cream and fresh cheese for breakfast, and even kissed Paloma on the forehead before leaving. "We're going to win today, my love," he said, carrying his Adidas sports bag. "And tonight we're going to celebrate in style. Make me some carnitas." "Yes." "And buy Tecate beers, the red ones." "Yes, my love," Paloma replied, waving goodbye from the door. "Play well." Rodrigo drove away in his blue Tsuru down Morelos Street, greeting the neighbors who were sweeping their sidewalks. Doña Carmen shouted from her window, "Go for it, Rodrigo! Beat those lions!" He responded with a cheerful honk and a smile that showed all his teeth. Paloma waited exactly 15 minutes to be sure he wouldn't come back for something he had forgotten. Then she went to the garden and dug up the jar of Nescafe with her savings. Then she went to the guest room and took out a pink school backpack she had used in middle school, hidden behind some old boxes. She stuffed as much underwear as she could into the backpack, along with 2 pairs of jeans, 3 blouses, a gray wool sweater, her most comfortable white sneakers, her hidden documents, a photograph of her deceased parents, her UPN student ID, a bottle of water, and a ham sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. But the most important thing she put in that backpack was a letter she had written and rewritten 20 times over the last 3 weeks, until the words were perfect. She had written it on a sheet of paper torn from the notebook where Rodrigo wrote down the household expenses. The letter read, "Rodrigo, thank you for teaching me who I don't want to be. Thank you for showing me that hell exists and that it has your face. Thank you for showing me that there are things worse than death. Don't look for me. You won't find me. And if you ever do find me, I won't be the same woman you left half dead on the floor of this house so many times." Paloma left the letter on Rodrigo's pillow on the side of the bed where he slept every night after beating her. Before leaving, Paloma did something she hadn't planned. She went to the cracked mirror in the bathroom and cut her hair. All of it. She let the brown strands fall onto the white sink like dead feathers. When she was done, her reflection showed her a completely different woman, a woman who looked like a soldier preparing for war. At 9:30 in the morning, Paloma Herrera left the house at 412 Morelos Street with a pink backpack on her shoulder and 430 pesos in her pocket. She didn't look back once. She walked 15 blocks to the new bus station in San Antonio. There she bought a ticket for the first bus leaving, regardless of the destination. It was an ETN bus bound for Los Angeles, leaving at 10:45 a.m. During the entire 7-hour trip, Paloma did not sleep a wink. She stared out the window as Texas became Michoacan. Michoacan became the state of Los Angeles, and the state of Los Angeles became the federal district. Every kilometer she traveled away from San Antonio was 1 kilometer closer to freedom. Meanwhile, on the soccer field in the Santa Margarita neighborhood, Rodrigo Mendoza scored a goal in the 73rd minute of the game. His teammates carried him on their shoulders as he shouted with excitement, unaware that at that very moment, his life as he knew it was ending forever. The Prospect Hill Lions won 3-2, but Rodrigo Mendoza had just lost the only thing he really controlled in his life, his victim. And when a predator loses its prey, it becomes either the most dangerous animal in the world or the most defenseless. Rodrigo arrived home at 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, November 5th, with a smile from ear to ear and a bottle of Don Julio tequila in his hand. The Lions had won, and he had been the star of the game. His teammates had carried him off the field like a hero. His friends' wives had congratulated him with kisses on the cheek, and even the coach had told him he had a future in amateur soccer. "Paloma!" he shouted from the doorway, throwing his muddy sneakers on the living room floor. "Come say hello to the champion." Silence. "Paloma!" he shouted again, heading toward the kitchen. "I hope you have those carnitas ready." The kitchen was empty. There were no carnitas. There were no Tecate beers in the refrigerator. There wasn't even a warm tortilla waiting for him. Rodrigo frowned. In 8 years of marriage, Paloma had never disobeyed a direct order. "Never, Paloma," he shouted as he climbed the stairs to the bedroom. "Are you upstairs?" When he opened the door to the master bedroom, the first thing he saw was the letter on his pillow, a notebook page folded in half with his name written in his wife's shaky handwriting. Rodrigo read it once, then read it again, and then a third time, because his brain refused to process what he was seeing. "Thank you for teaching me who I don't want to be." The words stabbed him in the chest like poisoned daggers. "Paloma!" he roared, running through the house like a madman. "Paloma, come out wherever you are!" He checked every closet, every bathroom, under the beds, behind the curtains. Nothing. He went to the garage to see if the car was still there, and it was. He ran to the garden to look for her among the plants. Nothing. Then he noticed something that froze him in his tracks. In the master bathroom, the sink was full of cut hair. Chestnut strands floated in the water like dead seaweed. "No, no, no, no," Rodrigo muttered, taking a handful of hair in his hands. "This isn't happening." He sat on the bathroom floor with his wife's hair between his fingers, and for the first time in his adult life, Rodrigo Mendoza burst into tears like a 5-year-old child. But he didn't cry out of love. He cried out of panic. Because without Paloma, he was nobody. Without Paloma to humiliate, to control, to systematically destroy every night, Rodrigo Mendoza was just a 35-year-old, fat, bald man who worked in a factory and lived in a house falling apart in a lower middle-class neighborhood. Without his victim, the predator was just a coward with anger issues. Rodrigo spent the whole night awake, calling Paloma's cell phone every 10 minutes. The phone rang from the bedroom dresser. She had left it there, along with her wedding ring and a gold chain he had given her on their 2nd anniversary. On Sunday morning, Rodrigo went out like a madman to look for her. He scoured the entire Prospect Hill neighborhood, asking neighbors if they had seen his wife. They all told him the same thing. No, they hadn't seen her since the day before. "Did something happen?" asked Doña Carmen, the neighbor next door. "You look very worried, Rodrigo." "She went to San Antonio with her sister," he lied. "She forgot to tell me what time she was coming back." "Oh, how strange. Yesterday morning I saw her leave alone with a backpack." "A backpack?" Rodrigo turned pale. "What kind of backpack?" "A pink backpack, like a school backpack. I thought it was strange because she was walking, not driving." Rodrigo ran back home. If Paloma had left on foot with a backpack, it meant she had planned everything. It hadn't been an impulse. She hadn't gone to a relative's house to think things over. She had run away like a criminal escaping from prison. On Monday morning, Rodrigo didn't go to work. He stayed home waiting for her to return, hoping it was all a nightmare, that she would show up at the door apologizing and promising never to disobey him again. But Paloma didn't come back. He didn't go to work on Tuesday either. His supervisor called him 3 times. Rodrigo didn't answer. On Wednesday, his boss showed up at 412 Morelos Street. Rodrigo opened the door in his pajamas, unshaven, with 5 days of stubble and bloodshot eyes. "Mendoza, what's wrong with you?" asked his boss, a 50-year-old man named Engineer Ramirez. "You haven't been in for 3 days without notice." "My wife got sick," Rodrigo muttered. "She's very ill. I have to take care of her." Engineer Ramirez looked inside the house. There was no sick woman in sight, only clutter, empty beer bottles, and a rancid smell coming from the living room. "Is she in the hospital?" "No, she's resting." "Rodrigo, if you need to be absent, you have to bring a doctor's note. You know the rules." Yes, I'll bring it tomorrow." But Rodrigo never brought a doctor's note. In fact, he never returned to work. With no dove waiting for him at home, no victim to justify his existence, Rodrigo began to crumble like a sandcastle in the rain. He started drinking as soon as he got up. He stopped bathing, stopped leaving the house, stopped answering the phone. His friends from the soccer team came looking for him several times, but he wouldn't open the door. "Rodrigo!" his buddy Javier shouted from outside. "Open up, you bastard! We're worried about you." "Go away," Rodrigo shouted from inside. "Leave me alone. Where's Paloma? We want to talk to her." She left and left me alone. just like all ungrateful women. A month after Paloma's disappearance, Rodrigo had lost his job. He had stopped paying for electricity and water and had pawned everything of value in the house to buy alcohol. But worst of all was the poverty. Worst of all were the nightmares. Every night Rodrigo dreamed of Paloma, but not the submissive, terrified Paloma he had known. He dreamed of a different Paloma, strong, self-confident, who looked at him with contempt and told him he was a coward, a useless man who only felt powerful when he hit women. And in those dreams, she was no longer afraid. In those dreams, she looked at him as if he were a cockroach. One night in December, 3 months after Paloma disappeared, Rodrigo fell asleep with a lit candle on the living room table. He had been drinking cheap tequila and looking at old photographs of his marriage, trying to remember when it all started to go wrong. At 3 a.m., the candle tipped over. The curtains caught fire first, then the sofa, then the entire living room. Rodrigo woke up when the smoke burned his lungs. The house was on fire. He managed to crawl out the back door with second-degree burns on his hands and face. It took the firefighters 20 minutes to arrive. By then, house number 412 on Morelos Street was nothing but ashes and burnt memories. Rodrigo stood on the sidewalk, watching everything he had built in his life go up in smoke, while the neighbors whispered behind his back, "Poor thing, he hasn't been the same since his wife left. Did she leave him for another man? Who knows?" But something made him leave like that overnight. Rodrigo heard the whispers and understood something that destroyed him more than the fire. Everyone suspected the truth. Everyone knew that he had been the monster. And now, with no home, no job, no money, and no victim, Rodrigo Mendoza was exactly what he had always been inside. Nothing. But what he didn't know was that 500 kilometers away in Los Angeles, a woman named Paloma was watching the San Antonio news on the internet. And when she saw the news about the fire at the house on Morelos Street, she didn't feel sorry. She felt justice. November 2024. A full year had passed since Paloma Herrera had disappeared from San Antonio, and the woman walking through the streets of Los Angeles' historic center no longer resembled the victim who had fled with a pink backpack. She called herself Patricia Morales. The change had been radical but realistic. Her hair was dyed jet black and cut into an elegant bob that reached her shoulders. She had lost 20 kilos, following a strict routine of exercise and healthy eating. Her face, once swollen from constant beatings, now showed the fine features she had always had, but which violence had distorted. Her eyes were completely different, confident, determined, with no trace of the fear that had characterized them for 8 years. Patricia worked as the coordinator of a shelter for women victims of violence called Casa Hope, located in the Doctores neighborhood. She had started as a volunteer cleaning bathrooms and serving food, but her personal experience and natural intelligence had quickly made her the right-hand woman of the director, Dr. Mercedes Salinas. During that year, Patricia had done something no one expected. She had studied, not a full university degree, but something more specific and powerful. She had taken intensive courses in human rights at the UNAM, certifications in gender violence, diplomas in trauma psychology, and had learned every article of the penal code related to domestic violence. But above all, she had worked on more than 200 real cases of abused women. She knew every legal loophole, every gap in the system, every strategy that abusers used to escape justice. She had become an expert, not because of academic degrees, but because of pure experience and knowledge acquired in the trenches. Patricia had also done something else that was very smart. She had built a network of professional contacts. She knew specialized lawyers, forensic psychologists, social workers, investigative journalists, and even judges who respected her work at the shelter. For 12 months, she had meticulously documented Rodrigo Mendoza's life, hiring private investigators with the money she had saved from working and selling jewelry she had taken from the house before fleeing. She knew he had lost his job at the factory a month after his disappearance. She knew he had burned down his house during a drunken binge in December. She knew he had lived on the streets for 3 months before getting a job as a porter at the San Juan de Dios market. She knew he had attempted suicide in March and had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. She knew he now lived in a miserable room. He drank himself unconscious every night and told anyone who would listen that his perfect wife had abandoned him for no reason. But Patricia also knew something more important. She had collected testimonies from all the women Rodrigo had tried to seduce over the past year, because a man like him could not live without a victim. Maria, the gordita vendor at the market, had testified before a notary that Rodrigo constantly harassed her and had once tried to touch her by force. Carmen, the waitress at the cantina, had recorded on video how he threatened her when she rejected his advances. 3 other women had similar stories. The pattern was crystal clear. Rodrigo Mendoza was a serial predator who hadn't changed at all. He had only lost his power. On November 15th, Patricia Morales returned to San Antonio not as a lawyer, but as something much more dangerous, an expert activist who knew the system inside and out. She stayed at a discreet hotel downtown, and the first thing she did was contact Roberto Santillan, the lawyer Rodrigo had mentioned mockingly a year earlier. Roberto was famous for winning impossible domestic violence cases, and when Patricia showed him her file, his eyes lit up. "Ms. Morales," he said after reviewing all the material, "this isn't just a case of domestic violence. This is a manual on how to legally destroy an aggressor." "Exactly," Patricia replied. "Will you take it?" "I'll take it, and I guarantee we're going to win." On the second day, Patricia filed the most comprehensive complaint the Texas Attorney General's office had ever seen. Not only did she have evidence from her own case, but also testimonies from Rodrigo's new victims, psychological analyses that demonstrated his pattern of behavior, and even the testimony of Doña Carmen, her neighbor, who had finally decided to speak up after learning that Patricia was still alive. On the third day, Patricia went to see her sister Hope. When Hope opened the door and saw this elegant, self-assured woman, she didn't recognize her immediately. "Paloma," she whispered when Patricia took off her sunglasses. "Hi, Espe." The hug lasted 20 minutes. Later, over coffee, Patricia explained everything she had done during that year. "I can't believe you're the same person," Hope said. "I seem powerful because now I am. Rodrigo taught me that the world is full of predators, but I also learned that prey can become hunters." On the fourth day, Patricia went to the San Juan de Dios market. Rodrigo was no longer the burly, threatening man he used to be. He was a 50-kilo specter with white hair, trembling hands, and the lost look of someone who had hit rock bottom several times. Patricia approached him directly. "Rodrigo Mendoza." He looked up. Something in that voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "Who's asking?" "Patricia Morales, representative of Casa Hope. I'm here to notify you that tomorrow you will be arrested for aggravated domestic violence, grievous bodily harm, and sexual harassment of multiple victims." Rodrigo turned pale. "What are you talking about? I don't know anyone named Patricia." Patricia leaned toward him and whispered, "Rodrigo, thank you for teaching me who I don't want to be." The familiar phrase hit him like a bolt of lightning. Rodrigo stared at her, and recognition slowly dawned on him. "It can't be. You're dead." "You left. I left," Patricia confirmed. "But I came back, and this time I'm not alone." At that moment, 2 police officers approached from behind. "Rodrigo Mendoza Salazar," one of them asked. "Yes, you are under arrest for the crimes of aggravated domestic violence and grievous bodily harm. You have the right to remain silent." As they read him his rights, Rodrigo stared at Patricia with wide eyes. "This isn't fair," he shouted as they handcuffed him. "I was a good husband. She abandoned me." Patricia looked at him with a calmness that chilled the blood. "Rodrigo, for 8 years you had all the power. Now it's my turn." When they took Rodrigo away, Patricia stood in the market feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. She hadn't come back as a lawyer, but she had come back as something much more dangerous to a man like Rodrigo. She had returned as a woman who knew exactly how the system worked and how to use it to win. On the 5th day, the trial that would change everything would begin, and Patricia Morales was ready for war. He beat her every night. The day she disappeared, her nightmare began. Part 8 of 8, Monday, February 3rd, 2025. The San Antonio Court of Justice was crowded like never before in a domestic violence case. The news had spread throughout the city. The woman who had mysteriously disappeared a year ago had returned to face her attacker in the most high-profile trial of the decade. Patricia Morales entered the courtroom dressed in a black tailored suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and with a confidence that radiated power. At her side walked Roberto Santillan, recognized as the best criminal lawyer in Texas. Behind them came an impressive entourage: Dr. Mercedes Salinas from the Casa Hope Shelter, journalist Laura Vasquez from El Informador, and a delegation of women's rights activists. On the other side of the aisle, Rodrigo Mendoza entered in handcuffs, escorted by 2 law enforcement officers. In 3 months of pretrial detention, he had lost another 10 quilles. His court-appointed lawyer, a young recent graduate named Mr. Perez, carried a thin file and looked nervous. Judge Hector Ramirez Gonzalez, with 30 years of experience in the judicial system, called the court to order. Case number 432-2025 is now open. The public prosecutor's office v. Rodrigo Mendoza Salazar for the crimes of aggravated domestic violence, grievous bodily harm, and threats. Attorney Santillan may begin his opening statement. Roberto Santillan stood up and walked to the center of the courtroom. His voice echoed throughout the chamber. Your Honor, distinguished attendees, this is not just another case of domestic violence. This is the case of a systematic predator who physically and psychologically tortured his wife for 8 years, believing he would never have to pay the consequences for his actions. Rodrigo Mendoza turned his home into a personal concentration camp where the only prisoner was a woman who made the mistake of loving him. He beat her every night as if it were his right. He humiliated her as if she were his property. He destroyed her piece by piece until she had no choice but to flee for her life. But there is something Rodrigo Mendoza never understood. Victims who survive hell return as warriors. And today, that warrior is here to see justice done. The court fell silent. Patricia maintained her composure, but inside she felt that every word was a balm for the wounds of 8 years. I call Mrs. Patricia Morales to the stand, Santillan announced. Patricia stood up and walked to the witness box. The judge swore her in, and she sat down in front of the microphone. The entire courtroom looked on expectantly. Ms. Morales, Santillan began, can you tell us your real name? My birth name is Paloma Herrera Vasquez. Patricia Morales is the name I adopted to protect myself and rebuild my life. Why did you change your identity? Patricia looked directly at Rodrigo before answering. He was pale as a ghost. Because Paloma Herrera died in that house. She died on the night of October 13th, 2023, when my husband broke 2 of my ribs, dislocated my shoulder, and cut my forehead, causing it to bleed profusely. That night, I realized that if I stayed, he would kill me, so Paloma had to die so that I could live. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several women in the audience began to cry silently. Can you describe the routine of violence you experienced in your marriage? Patricia took a deep breath and began to recount 8 years of hell in a firm voice that did not waver once. She described specific beatings, detailed humiliations, death threats, marital rape, absolute financial control, systematic social isolation. She spoke for 2 hours without interruption. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Rodrigo, meanwhile, slumped in his chair like a broken doll. No, that's not how it was. She's lying, he muttered. But his own lawyer put his hand on his shoulder to silence him. Ms. Morales, Santillan continued, do you have physical evidence of these assaults? Patricia nodded. The lawyer projected hundreds of photographs she had secretly taken over the years onto a giant screen. Bruises, wounds, swollen eyes, split lips, strangulation marks. The audience gasped in horror. 3 people had to leave the courtroom because they felt ill. Why didn't you report it sooner? Because he had convinced me that no one would believe me. Because he had destroyed my self-esteem to the point where I believed I deserved the beatings. Because when my sister came to ask him directly if he hit me, he convinced her that I was clumsy and dramatic. Patricia turned to the audience and spotted hope who was crying in the front row. My own sister doubted me because Rodrigo Mendoza is an expert manipulator. If my family didn't believe me, who else would? After Patricia, a dozen witnesses took the stand and painted a complete picture of a systematic abuser. Doña Carmen, the neighbor, admitted through tears that she had heard screams every night for years, but had never called the police because she didn't want to get involved in marital problems. Dr. Hernandez from the civil hospital testified about the 8 times he had treated Paloma for domestic accidents, presenting medical records that clearly showed a pattern of violence. Maria, the gordita vendor at the market, testified that after Paloma's disappearance, Rodrigo had tried to sexually assault her twice. Carmen, the waitress at the cantina, played audio recordings of Rodrigo threatening her for rejecting his advances. The private investigator presented a comprehensive report on Rodrigo's life after the disappearance. Job loss, alcoholism, violent behavior, multiple attempts to harass other women. When it was Rodrigo's turn to defend himself, he could barely speak. He was completely broken psychologically. I loved her. I never wanted to hurt her. Sometimes I got desperate because she was very, very, very... What, Mr. Mendoza? Santillan asked. Very disobedient, Rodrigo muttered. The answer caused a commotion in the courtroom. The judge had to call for order. Do you consider disobedience to justify physical violence? Rodrigo remained silent. His court-appointed lawyer was completely overwhelmed by the situation. Mr. Mendoza, she abandoned me. That was all he could say. Because you were slowly killing her, Santillan replied. Or he denies breaking her ribs. I don't remember. You deny cutting her forehead. I was drunk. You deny strangling her until she lost consciousness. I'm not a monster, Rodrigo finally shouted. She provoked me. She knew how to make me angry. The entire court fell silent. Rodrigo had just confessed his guilt in front of 200 witnesses. His own lawyer covered his face with his hands. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The media covered it daily. It became a national phenomenon that put the issue of domestic violence at the center of public debate. When the moment of the verdict arrived, Judge Ramirez spoke with a solemnity that few had heard in his voice. In 30 years as a judge, I have rarely seen such compelling evidence and such a clear case of systematic domestic violence. The defendant, Rodrigo Mendoza Salazar, is found guilty on all counts. The court erupted in applause. Patricia remained calm, but a single tear ran down her cheek. The sentence is 15 years in prison without parole, plus an additional 5 years of supervised release. In addition, he must pay compensation of 500,000 pesos to the victim for physical and psychological damages. Rodrigo collapsed, literally fainting in his chair, and had to be carried away on a stretcher. But the story did not end there. 6 months later, Patricia Morales founded the organization Renacimiento, dedicated to helping women victims of violence completely rebuild their lives. The shelter she established in San Antonio became a national model. A year later, Patricia married Roberto Santillan, the lawyer who had helped her win the case. It was a small, intimate wedding, where she chose to wear a white dress because she finally felt worthy of purity. 2 years later, her son Alejandro Santillan Herrera was born, and on the last line of his birth certificate, where the father's name appears, Patricia wrote a note that no civil registry official questioned. Father Roberto Santillan Lopez, note, this child will never know violence. Rodrigo Mendoza died in prison 3 years after his sentencing, during a fight with other inmates. Patricia found out in the newspaper and felt nothing, because monsters only have power over us as long as we fear them. And Patricia Morales was no longer afraid of anything. The woman who had disappeared as a victim had returned as an avenger and had won. This story is based on survivors of domestic violence. If you or someone you know is experiencing violence, remember, there is always a way out. There is always hope, and there are always people willing to help. National Violence Hotline 911, because no one deserves to live in fear. Thank you for joining me until the end of this story. Your time and support mean a lot to this channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments what you thought, and what other stories you would like to hear. See you next time.